welcome to Jay Coletti's Racket Reviews. Happy St. Patrick's Day. My name is Jay Coletti and I will be your hostess. Here on Racket Reviews, we are dedicated to learning about all things organized crime, and today I'm really looking forward to another individual study with you today in celebration of the holiday, focused on the infamous Irish gangster Dean O'Banion. O'Banion, in his short life, inspired so much adoration that his death inspired war. We obviously have a lot to discuss, so let's get right to it. Charles Dean O'Banion was born on July 8, 1892 in Maroa, Illinois, to the Irish Catholic couple Charles and Emma O'Banion. O'Banion's father had moved to Illinois from Kentucky with his family, and he became a barber. He met his wife in Chicago, and they were married in Chicago on May 19, 1886. Charles was 19, Emma was 15, and the Irish Catholic couple moved to the mostly Protestant Maroa to start their family. Maroa was a small town and farming community, with several shops, saloons, and weekly dances. O'Banion grew up very different from the life for which he would become infamous. By all accounts, O'Banion was a mischievous child with an angelic face who enjoyed playing pranks on his fellow classmates. He is reported to have sometimes been mean while committing these pranks, spilling the contents of lunchboxes onto the ground or rubbing his muddy shoe across a girl's white one, but he is widely described as a good child. In fact, he had even been featured in the newspaper, having been neither absent nor tardy to school in February of 1901. After O'Banion had become a notorious criminal in the 1920s, there were many publications claiming that he hailed from Ireland, but that is not the case. The last immigrant from Ireland in his family had been his maternal grandfather, who immigrated to the United States in the mid-1800s. In fact, even the name O'Banion, when traced back to the 11th century, is derived from the Welsh surname Albanion. Emma O'Banion would be diagnosed with tuberculosis shortly after the birth of Dean O'Banion's little sister Ruth. When the symptoms worsened and Emma O'Banion was bedridden in the sanitarium, Dean O'Banion wrote her the following letter. Dear Mama, I love you awful well. At school, I have only got a lockbox and 2 tablets and a book to write things in that Miss Hill puts on the board, and a box of pens and a pen and a pencil and a ruler and bell that says Dr. Bell's Pine Tar Honey on it. I have used 5 pages with my tablet. Tomorrow it will be cold weather. I will draw a picture now. Despite what her tombstone lists as 1868 to 1898, Emma O'Banion died of tuberculosis in 1901 when Dean O'Banion was 9 years old, and this shook the foundation of the little boy's reality. It was in that year 1901 that O'Banion's father moved the family to Chicago and unknowingly sealed his son's fate. The O'Banion family moved to a crime-ridden northern section of Chicago known as Kilgubbin, or Little Hell. O'Banion would return to Maroa on an annual basis to pay respect to his mother, whom he loved dearly. He would bring the most beautiful floral arrangements to her grave that had been made lovingly at his later infamous flower shop. O'Banion's criminal beginnings really started when the budding mobster got a job as a newsboy. Despite how movies will portray this job as boys in yesteryear waving newspapers in the air saying, "Extra, extra, read all about it," this was actually a very violent business. Newspaper publishers paid boys to sell papers, and boys would often beat each other and steal one another's earnings. O'Banion, although not the biggest kid on the block, was tough and hard-headed, and he held his own in this environment. While not on his hustle, O'Banion attended the Holy Name Parochial School and served as an altar boy and choir member at the Catholic Holy Name Cathedral. He continued to have a wild streak, and would even ride on the back bumper of streetcars, and this was an action known as bumper riding. It was while doing this that, after the streetcar came to a sudden stop, O'Banion fell to the ground and a car ran over his leg. Doctors at that hospital believed that O'Banion would die, but he survived. However, his left leg was permanently an inch shorter than his right, and he would walk with a limp for the rest of his life. In the newspaper business, when he was older, O'Banion would be promoted from newspaper boy to slugger, and would violently ensure that newspaper stands sold the papers of the publishers who hired him, starting with the Chicago Tribune until Mo Annenberg hired O'Banion and his men, whose names we'll discuss in just a moment, as sluggers for the Chicago Examiner under his media empire known as Hearst Newspapers. This type of media malpractice came to be known as Chicago's newspaper wars. O'Banion was also known to have met with political bosses at Annenberg's behest in the 42nd and 43rd wards, and they would hire him around election season to influence voters to cast their ballots in the right direction. As a teenager, O'Banion had formed a small crew that would eventually grow to become the Northside Gang, that included men such as Earl Jaime Weiss, Vincent the Schemer Drucci, and George Bugs Moran. This crew would get their start as thieves with the Market Street Gang and working under Annenberg. O'Banion would get a job in 1908 at McGovern's Tavern, where he would sing to patrons, serve them beer, and mop the floors. He would also allegedly drug them and steal their wallets. It has been reported that the patrons of McGovern's were criminals who specialized in safecracking, and O'Banion would go on to work with them in robbery. But most reports maintain that he met these safecrackers through his connection with Mo Annenberg, and from my research it seems like it could have been a combination of both McGovern's and Annenberg. We can confirm with some certainty that O'Banion and his gang were introduced to the infamous safecracker Charles the Ox Reiser through Annenberg, and Reiser taught the boys the tricks of his trade. O'Banion's first run-in with the law came in 1909 when he was caught stealing stamps and perfume from a drugstore. He would spend 6 months in Bridewell Reformatory for burglary. He would run into trouble again in 1911 and wind up serving 3 months behind bars for carrying a concealed weapon. Despite O'Banion's recognizable criminal status, 1911 was the last time that O'Banion would spend any time behind bars. O'Banion, like many criminals in his era, came into his own with bootlegging when prohibition was made law in the United States. The key part of that is that prohibition was made law in the United States, not in Canada. O'Banion started his bootlegging operation by smuggling beer, whiskey, and gin from Canada for disbursement in Chicago. O'Banion was not the only man to think of this, of course, and almost immediately ran into trouble with the Italian Southside Gang, then headed by Johnny Torrio. Much more on this in a moment. It was at the same time that he began working as a co-owner for his front business, Schofield's Flower Shop, on 738 North State Street. Unlike many mobsters with a front business, O'Banion found that he enjoyed the work of creating floral arrangements and spent a lot of time in his shop actually working. The flower shop was right across from Holy Name Cathedral, where O'Banion attended Mass regularly, and many of his arrangements were created for the families of fallen gangsters. Actually, Schofield's became one of the most popular florists in the city, especially for families of criminals. O'Banion made a good living from his legitimate business. He was also generous. It would seem that O'Banion did not forget his roots. He sent money to his sister and her husband, he raised a monument on his mother's grave, took food and necessities to the poorer areas in Chicago, and took care of his aging father. Continuing in O'Banion's personal life, he married Viola Caniff on February 5th, 1921. The couple was married at Holy Name Cathedral and moved into a posh apartment together. O'Banion was apparently a very good husband, taking after his father in the way of adoring his beloved. According to Viola, Dean never left the house without telling her where he was going, and often returned with handcrafted bouquets that he had made for her at Schofield's. In his criminal career, O'Banion was making waves. O'Banion was responsible for the first of many liquor hijackings in Chicago on December 19, 1921. O'Banion noticed the truck at a stop sign and jumped into the cab, gun drawn, forcing the driver out of the vehicle. He took the truck to Jewish gangster Samuel Morton's garage to store and sell the liquor, splitting the profit with him. In fact, it was from Morton's florist friend, William Schofield, that O'Banion purchased his co-ownership with the flower shop. Morton would be absorbed into O'Banion's rapidly growing Northside Gang, as well as other names such as Louis Altieri and Dan McCarthy. As a bootlegger, O'Banion and his gang would steal over $100,000 worth of Canadian whiskey from railroad yards and break into Sibley Distillery, stealing 1,750 barrels of whiskey. From the illegal distribution of alcohol, O'Banion is estimated to have made around $1 million per year, and that is not adjusting for inflation. Johnny Torrio, who was late to the bootlegging game due to the former boss Jim Colosimo's initial refusal to participate in the illegal liquor business, met with top bootleggers in Chicago to divvy up the city. Due to O'Banion's success, Torrio asked him to join the citywide crime syndicate, with Torrio at the top, to keep the peace and divide the city into territories. O'Banion agreed to this deal and walked away with the North Side and a lucrative area known as the Gold Coast along the northern lakefront. This division of the city was meant to stop an onslaught of bloody turf wars. This idea ultimately failed, and Torrio also saw this as a means through which gangsters could control Chicago's politics. It was harmonious at first. The bootleggers agreed to their territories, and O'Banion even lent out his sluggers to help win the mayoral election in Cicero for Torrio. This peaceful arrangement would last for about 3 years before O'Banion became dissatisfied. Since the Cicero district became a goldmine for the Southsiders thanks to their new mayor, O'Banion felt that he was entitled to a cut of that profit. Torrio agreed. He gave some of Cicero's beer rights to O'Banion. O'Banion was also given a strip in Cicero, as well as a quarter ownership in one of the Southside casinos known as the Ship. After this, O'Banion, who was always looking to maximize his profits, began going to the Chicago speakeasies outside of his territory and convincing them to move their establishments to his strip in Cicero. This infuriated Al Capone, who turned to Johnny Torrio for a solution. Torrio attempted to convince O'Banion to stop by offering him a percentage of the profits from some of the Southside's brothels, but O'Banion refused and was insulted by this offer because he hated prostitution. Torrio did not escalate this issue, but it would not be forgotten. When the Jaina brothers, the crew used off and on by the outfit, and the crew who controlled the Italian area west of Chicago's downtown, began selling whiskey in O'Banion's north side, O'Banion came to Torrio for a solution, but Torrio would do nothing to stop them from doing business in his territory. The Jaina brothers wanted to kill O'Banion, but Torrio would not allow it. After this, O'Banion would try unsuccessfully to frame the murder of John Duffy on Torrio and Capone. Duffy was an associate of the North Side and apparently not a favorite of O'Banion's. Duffy has been described as a hanger-on. In February of 1924, Duffy murdered his wife of 8 days in a drunken rage and panicked upon awaking to see his bride killed by his own hands. He called a friend for money to get out of town, but word got to O'Banion. O'Banion called Duffy, agreeing to help, and told him to meet with him at Torrio and Capone's club, the Four Deuces, in hopes that what came next would be placed on Torrio and Capone's head. Witnesses reported seeing O'Banion and another man pick Duffy up from the club. Duffy's body would later be found in a snowbank outside of Chicago with 3 .38 caliber bullet wounds in his head. Another witness, who later retracted his statement, claimed to see O'Banion and 2 others disposing of Duffy's body. According to law enforcement, throughout O'Banion's life, he would be responsible for 25 murders. While O'Banion was not able to successfully pin the murder on Torrio and Capone, he did bring police scrutiny to the club, in which gambling, prostitution, and distribution of alcohol all took place. When asked by reporters about the Duffy murder, O'Banion said, "The police don't have to look for me. I'll go and look for them. I'll be at the state's attorney's office at 2:30 p.m. Monday afternoon. I can tell the state's attorney anything he wants to know about me. Whatever happened to Duffy is out of my line. I don't mix with that kind of riffraff." The tension between O'Banion and Torrio would come to a head in May of 1924 with the Sieben brewery raid. In the crime syndicate agreement, O'Banion had conceded 50% ownership of the Sieben brewery to Torrio. When O'Banion, always crafty, heard through the grapevine that there was to be a police raid on the brewery in May, he reached out to Torrio. O'Banion allegedly explained that he didn't want further trouble with the Jaina brothers and planned on leaving the rackets. He asked to sell his half of the brewery to Torrio, granting him full ownership. Torrio agreed and paid O'Banion $500,000 for his part. The exact night that O'Banion sent out his final shipment from the brewery, police raided the brewery and arrested O'Banion, Torrio, and several Southside associates. Since O'Banion had no previous bootlegging arrests and was no longer an owner in the business, he was able to avoid charges and was let go. Torrio, on the other hand, had to bail out himself and 6 associates. He would be indicted, incurring legal fees and the possibility of jail time. To make matters worse, O'Banion refused to return the $500,000 he had paid for full ownership of Sieben. O'Banion was no fool. He could read the room. Torrio and his Southside and the Jaina brothers all wanted him dead. To give the Southsiders and the Jaina crew time to cool off, O'Banion and his wife took a vacation that summer to Colorado to spend time at his friend Louis Alteri's ranch. O'Banion is reported to have enjoyed the Western lifestyle. During his time in Colorado, he also made arrangements for Thompson machine guns, a new type of weapon, to be sent to his Northside gangsters for use. O'Banion would visit Maroa one last time on August 26, 1924, before returning to Chicago, where fate awaited him. Perhaps the final nail in the coffin was on November 3, 1924, when O'Banion demanded that Angelo Jaina, of the Jaina Brothers crew, pay back the $30,000 debt owed to the ship Casino, a debt that Torrio was willing to pardon as a favor to the crew. Michael Merlo, who was head of the Italian brotherhood known as Unione Siciliana and a key voter in the Chicago crime syndicate, refused numerous times to give the green light on an O'Banion hit. Merlo insisted that the South Side come to a peaceful agreement with O'Banion instead. Mike Merlo would die of cancer on November 8, 1924. Before Merlo's body was cold, the order to take out O'Banion was approved. Merlo's funeral would lead to big business for O'Banion's flower shop. It has been reported that Frankie Yale and other gangsters had visited Schofield's on November 9, 1924 to discuss floral arrangements. But this was actually an opportunity for the mobsters to memorize the layout of Schofield's for the impending assassination. That same evening, O'Banion received a special order by telephone for an arrangement to be picked up the next morning. O'Banion agreed. The next morning, on November 10, 1924, O'Banion's bodyguard and friend Louis Alteri was hungover and did not come in to work. While O'Banion was in the back of the store clipping chrysanthemums, 2 or 3 visitors entered the flower shop, apparently to pick up the order for Merlo's funeral. From these visitors, 6 shots were fired into O'Banion. He was killed instantly, lying among the flowers he had so carefully arranged. O'Banion's murder remains unsolved. Of course, there are many theories that emerge about this murder. The primary belief is that Frankie Yale, John Scalise, and Albert Anselmi were the men coming into the shop to pick up the order. Allegedly, O'Banion had greeted them, asking if they were here to pick up Merlot's flowers, and shaking Yale's hand. Yale used the handshake to lock O'Banion in place, and the men fired bullets into his chest, cheeks, and throat. O'Banion was shot at such close range that the gunpowder burnt his face. The other theories I have come across include Angelo Jaina and Salvatore Amatuna as 2 of the 3 gunmen, with either Frankie Yale, John Scalise, Joseph Junta or Albert Anselmi being the third. Frankie Yale's a primary suspect and was actually stopped on a train by police while trying to get back to New York City. In order to avoid being taken into police custody, Yale explained that he had been attending Merlot's funeral and the police released him. O'Banion's murder would be the inciting incident that created the gang wars of the 1920s that plagued Chicago, eventually leading to the St. Valentine's Day Massacre in 1929. More than that, his murder rocked the Chicago area, specifically the Northside Gang, his family, and his dear friends. Upon hearing about the death of his mentor and best friend, it has been reported that Jaime Weiss fell sobbing onto the floor. Louis Altieri, racked with guilt and pain, was belligerent at O'Banion's funeral and eventually caused George Moran, the new head of the Northside Gang, to ask him to leave town. And of course, Viola O'Banion was stricken with grief as well. O'Banion's $10,000 funeral, not including flowers, was one of the largest in Chicago's history. It has been estimated that around 15,000 mourners came to the funeral service, with 26 vehicles needed just to carry the flowers. In fact, it was so excessive, and O'Banion was such an infamous criminal, that the Archdiocese refused to hold his Requiem Mass at the Holy Name Cathedral where he had attended for years. The funeral was held at Sparborough's Funeral Chapel on November 14, 1924. Hundreds of people flooded the streets and rooftops to say their final goodbye to the man who was charitable to and adored by many. Even his friends from his time as a slugger for newspaper publishers sent a lovely floral arrangement that said, "To our pal Dean, from Newsboys." Not everyone in attendance was sad to see O'Banion gone, however. It is reported that Johnny Torrio, Al Capone, and the Jaina brothers all attended the funeral as well. O'Banion's casket was carried by his dearest loved ones: Vincent Drucci, Louis Altieri, Frank Gusenberg, Dan McCarthy, George Moran, Matt Foley, Viola O'Banion, Reverend Patrick Malloy, Earl Jaime Weiss, Julius Kaufman, and William Schofield. Charles Dean O'Banion was buried at Mount Carmel Cemetery in Hillside, Illinois. He was only 32 years old. His body was buried in unconsecrated ground until 5 months after the burial, when Viola O'Banion was able to get her husband's remains moved within a few hundred feet of the bishop's mausoleum. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of Racket Reviews discussing the fascinating and short life of Dean O'Banion. We've spent a lot of time on this channel discussing the Italian Southside Gang, and I hope you had fun today learning a little bit more about the Irish Northsiders. Make sure to let me know in the comments below or on Facebook and Twitter who you think is responsible for O'Banion's murder. It is widely accepted that Frankie Yale was one of the shooters, but what about the other two? Also, don't forget to utilize social media and the comment section to let me know who you would like to see covered next. I always love hearing from you, and I'm always happy to investigate. Make sure to like, subscribe, and click notifications to get more Mafia content sent directly to your subbox. Ciao.